Good Shabbos. This week we start the book of Shemos. And in the book of Shemos, we now have transitioned from the Jewish people being just a large family to finally be called an Am B'nai Yisrael. Now they're the people of Israel. They're the nation of Israel. And as soon as they're called the nation of Israel by Paro, we see the first incident of anti-Semitism. He's afraid that the Rav V'atzmimenu, they might be too numerous, and they're going to gang up with us against our enemies. So we see the beginning of hatred of the Jewish people, and also the beginning of the Jewish people. And this week, hopefully, a ceasefire has just been signed, and hopefully it will go into action on Sunday. And God willing, the ceasefire should be the beginning of a peaceful transition. But that's right now just a hope and a prayer. I'd like to talk about the nature of peace. And when we think of peace, there's two types of peace. There's one which is a cessation of fighting, which we have, for example, Israel has a peace treaty with Egypt, which is considered like a cold peace. But really what's more important when we talk about peace is that we have to move to a place where we're really working together. Because the word shalom, peace in Hebrew, comes from the word shalem, to be complete, to be whole. And it's more important that it translates into action. So we have in this week's portion, we have something very interesting. We have Moshe being introduced as the leader of the Jewish people. And when God asks him to go and to lead the Jewish people, he says, I'm not a man of words. This always struck me as very strange because Moshe is probably the greatest man of words that ever lived amongst the Jewish people. All you have to do is read the rest of the Torah. So I think one explanation is, based on some Kabbalistic ideas, that there's three levels within the human experience. There's machshava, dibor, and masa. Machshava is thought, dibor is speech, and masa is action. And most people translate their thoughts into words, but the words aren't necessarily the perfect vehicle for the thoughts. And therefore, when they finally get translated into action, they might not be complete, and they might not be a real reflection of the original thought. The idea of Moshe saying he's not a man of words is that he's a man of action. He has the ability to take the concept and the idea and the dream, if you want to put it, for example, of peace or leadership in his case, and translate it into action. And that's why the first thing we see about Moshe is he goes out to see his people. And what does he do? He kills an Egyptian who's afflicting a Jew. He the next day tells off one Jew from hitting another Jew. He's a man of action. And the idea is that action is a complete reflection of the truth. And an ultimate peace is not just a thought, and not just words, not just a signature on a treaty or a ceasefire agreement, but actually when there's shlemus, when there's completeness, when there's wholeness, when there's a complete unity amongst all of the people. And I would argue that that's an ideal that perhaps we must reserve for messianic times, when there's a complete peace and a wholeness amongst the Jewish people and the nations of the world. Perhaps at this point, maybe all we could hope for is a cessation of hostility. But that's really what we're working for and working towards. And then the question is, before we get to that peace, we have to have shlemus, we have to have completeness and wholeness and peace within our own Jewish people. And I think that's something that we could attain in a much shorter time period. It doesn't necessarily have to be all the way in the future. I'd like to make 2 points about peace. One is the first time I believe we have the word shalem in the Torah as completeness is by Yaakov. It says, Vayava Yaakov Shalem ir Shechem. Yaakov came complete to the city of Shechem. And the commentaries all point out, well, that's very interesting. He had just been hurt and handicapped and crippled by his encounter with the man at night, it says that he was limping. So either the explanation is, as the Medrash says, that God miraculously healed Yaakov from his limp, or perhaps another explanation is when Yaakov recognizes that he has faults, when he has weaknesses, when he realizes that perhaps amongst his children, as the story unfolds, they're not all lovey-dovey, so to speak, with each other. As long as you recognize the fault lines, as long as you recognize your weaknesses, you're able to create a peace. And that peace isn't necessarily where everyone agrees with each other, but everyone's able to work with each other. And even though that seems like a weak peace, I would suggest that it's not, because human nature is that there's always going to be divisions. The question is, how do we deal with those divisions? Can we live as an Am Yisrael, as a people Israel? Can we live a completely b'shleimus, complete and whole, and not have those divisions tear us apart? There might be lines, there might be creases, but they're not. There's no tear in the fabric which holds us all together. I'd like to make one other note about the idea of peace, and that's something that the Medrash says about the Jewish people in Egypt. The Medrash asks, why were the Jewish people married to be saved by God? It says, weren't they also sinful? It's assuming that they were also worshiping idols in Egypt. And he says, well, no, they were shalem, they were complete. And it's an acronym for 3 words. They didn't change Shaloshinu as Shemam, they didn't change their names. They didn't change Lashonam, their language, and they didn't change Malbusham, their clothing. They kept their names, language, and clothing. And because of that, they were Zocha, they merited to be saved. Now, that's also a very strange idea, because there is no mitzvah, there's no commandment not to have a secular name. All you have to do is open Pirkei Avos, the Ethics of Our Fathers. One of the great rabbis is called Antignos Ish Socho. He has a Greek name. The Talmud's written in Aramaic, not in Hebrew. And the clothing that we wear, all you have to do is look at the clothing we're all wearing. We're wearing Western clothes. Hasidic Jewish clothing is really from the aristocracy of Europe from years ago. So we don't really have necessarily something which is Jewish clothing. We do change our clothes. But I think those 3 ideas are just a way of saying somehow or other we have to retain our identity as being part of the Jewish people. Even if we're sinful, even if we don't necessarily act the way we're supposed to act, even if, according to this Medrash, we're Ovdei Avodah Zarah, we're worshiping idols, as long as we retain our identity, we make sure that we realize that we're part of Am Yisrael, then we have shleimus, then we have completeness. We're able to hold together. And that's something we could work on, and hopefully we're working on that. That there's a unity amongst the Jewish people. The divisions are great. The divisions are clear between right and left, secular, religious, and in the religious world, there's many divisions. We know all of those divisions, and we know that we argue about those divisions. But not only in times of trouble, but in all times, we have to make sure that we also have shleimus, that we don't let that tear us apart, that we're still part of Am Yisrael. And that Medrash is saying, one way or another, whether it's through names, clothing, language, something distinct, something to identify as one Jewish people, that's what we have to do. And if we show that we are shalem, that we're complete, and we have shalom b'Yisrael, there's peace amongst the Jewish people, then hopefully that will carry over to eventually, won't just be a ceasefire, but Emir Hashem, God willing, that ceasefire will turn into shleimus, into completeness. And the Torah starts off in Parsha Shmos is saying that Vayakam Melech Chadash, a new king arose in Egypt. V'lo yodas Yosef, he didn't know Yosef. He forgot what Yosef has done. The world hopefully will realize that the Jewish people are a light unto the nations, that they brought great ideas and ethics and morality to the world. And when they realize that, we'll hopefully be part of that complete shleimus, that complete fulfillment, wholeness with the world, and there'll be peace for the Jewish people and peace on earth. Good Shabbos.